we're going to be one of the youngest workforce in the world in another 3 or 4 years, thereabouts. So these people are not going to be skilled workers because we wish it. They're going to be skilled workers because we've given them the skills and the capacity to be. We can solve our problems by training them.
This is Solardey, where every story begins with the sun.
Welcome to the Solardey Podcast. It's great having you here.
It's my pleasure to be here, Prosper. Excited for the conversations we're about to have.
Awesome. And before we dive into what you're doing now, I would love for our listeners and viewers to get to know a little bit more about you, who you are, and who you were before Energy Talent Company.
Brilliant. I think who I am now and who I was, I hope it doesn't change too much. Well, my name is Ugochukwu, Chukwujiaka. Basically business executive. Most of my work has been in the energy space, so in the education space. So from learning experience design to partnerships and development to policy, and also as a venture developer, and now as a business owner within the space. And really, the reason why this is I'm a big believer in the fact that the way you move a people or a community or a continent out of poverty is through education. And the interesting question, as someone with a research outlook on life and someone with a deep interest in education, is how do you provide education at scale when education cannot be expensive? It's really easy to charge $100,000 and give MBA, high quality MBA, right? It's much more difficult when you have to do it with 200. Now you have to be extremely, extremely creative. But the reality is on the continent, large parts of the continent, $200 is not even easy money to come by. If you're going to train people at scale, we're going to be one of the youngest workforce in the world in another 3 or 4 years, thereabouts. So these people are not going to be skilled workers because we wish it. They're going to be skilled workers because we've given them the skills and the capacity to be. So if you're going to do that at scale for people who don't have the money, someone has to pay for it. The less expensive it is, the easier it is to find a way to get somebody to pay for it, whether the people who are getting it or not. So that's really about me. But core entrepreneurial, I think, probably comes from my earthly lineage of being an Igbo man and being exposed to family members who are mostly business people, but with a deep interest in education, health as well, but primarily focused on education for now.
Thank you for that. What gap did you see in the industry?
So the story probably starts a bit earlier than 2018, but 2018 is when I like to pick it from. So in 2018, I was doing, I like to call myself an idea factory, right? I'm always allowing my mind wander. So I was, reading I have a weird or a peculiar, not weird. My wife would say peculiar, so let me use peculiar. I have a peculiar pastime. I like to read research papers. I find them interesting, oddly enough. So one of the things I was reading at the time, I can't remember what exactly it was. I basically saw the cost of solar dropping, hockey stick, as they call it. And that was interesting to see because I'm a student of the, innovation curve. If you've read Moore's law and things like that, you know that as these things go this way, they just keep going that way. So this program was interesting for me on two levels. One was being from Nigeria, we've not figured out 100-year-old technology of providing electricity consistently yet. And if you have a technology that's getting cheaper that fast and is distributed, there was a big opportunity there. The second part was, this came much later, but doing research from seeing that innovation curve and just seeing what are the opportunities that exist with this, right? If you could provide access to power and being in the education space, it was clear that this sector was going to grow significantly from an access or a requirement or a demand for talents. Right. So that's basically how the story started. So we did, I was at the time living in Ghana. So we did a bunch of research in Ghana and in Nigeria to, see what the opportunity was, spoke with a bunch of people and figured out that, not only could you provide access to energy, which is almost like is the foundation for any sort of prosperity, right? In this age and time. And you can solve the problem of access to energy as it exists in Nigeria and broadly Africa. But also you could solve a second problem, which is access to jobs for the teeming youth population. So that's how we got in. And it was, very interesting for us then, because it then allowed us to fully express our research question of how do you provide access to education at scale, while still solving the two things. So that's how we got into this space.
This is very interesting because the conversation about energy transition and energy development has always been about assets. It's the solar panels, batteries, but nobody is actually talking about workforce.
Yeah.
Do you think that the workforce shortage affects Africa more, or Europe, or globally? How do you see it internationally?
In 2023, there was a tweet Elon Musk put out that the only limitation they had, with this, he has a solar company, I think most of your audience would know, was that how fast they could churn out, installations. And it was a function of human resource, right? So that was his biggest challenge at the time. And this was in the US. Interestingly for us, when we started the research, we actually looked at companies in the US, some of the leading, I don't want to call names. So we spoke to HR in those companies to sort of figure out what sort of problems they had and how they were going about solving it. In addition to speaking to companies in Kenya, South Africa, and a few other places, right? So really, there's a persistent problem of human resource globally. I like to say that there are currently three pillars, right, for the transition or energy transition. There's the pillar of access to technology. And, we started off with that conversation, seeing the rapid development and growth of technology. There's a second pillar of access to capital. The access to capital pillar is more peculiar for Africa, but that is really being solved, right? You have a lot of, because cases being made for commercial and industrial installations on the continent. So you have a lot more capital coming into the market, a lot more guarantors, enabling international players to come in and having that confidence because you have local financiers who can guarantee certain investment, all right? The piece that with technology, China is flooding the market. So everybody is excited by that. And it's across borders, not just Africa, right? Because in Europe, large parts of the panels that they use are from the Chinese market. So the piece that doesn't seem as attacked as this other two is the talent piece. Traditional institutions are not able to churn out talents as fast as they should. When you come to the continent, you might have a bunch of small training institutes here and there. Quality then becomes a question mark if people are not training for hands-on skill and training for more for cognitive things or knowledge, right? So for us, we know that it's a global problem. We know that even with the change in geopolitics and migration and how people view that, being able to provide access to those talents even locally, eventually those changes. Because if you have to choose between not letting someone to come into your country and dying of being cold because you don't have the manpower, you're going to pick letting someone come into your country to provide access to heating for you eventually, right? So we have the population or the youthful population. And that for me is a big asset. So we can solve our problems by training them, but we can also solve the global shortage of talent. I don't know if you've seen the data, but for every tradesperson who is retiring in the US, for every 2 tradesperson that retires in the US, there's no replacement for that tradesperson, right? And, Europe is already what it is. It's aging population as well. Yeah, so it's a global problem, and it's a problem for which we have the input resource of young population to be able to cater to the world.
I like how you will look at it, train locally and export globally. And while training them locally, we are also solving the Nigerian workforce need, not only Nigeria, Africa, from Ghana to Kenya. But what do you think that are challenges facing a Nigerian trained engineer from getting employment abroad?
Well, geopolitics have changed recently. 3 years ago, it used to be that you could potentially move. A lot of countries 3 years ago had policies around bringing in foreign talents. It's not gone because I think Canada last 2 weeks or so reintroduced that policy or some segment of that policy. But beyond that is also just the transferability of your certificates, right?
Mm.
So in Kenya, for example, they have 3 levels for the renewable energy space or solar specifically, level 1, level 2, level 3. And that's certificate is issued by EPRA, the regulatory body in Kenya. If you're moving from Kenya to, say, Abu Dhabi, that's about 5 hours away, or from Nairobi to Abu Dhabi, that's about 5 hours away, and they have no way of validating your level 3 certificate that you've gotten from EPRA, then that becomes a problem, right? Because that means you probably then have to get a certification that is available there. And in that period, as you know, for a lot of people who have with Nigeria lingo, japa, right? Having to go do schooling all over again, even though you're experienced and you have the potentially have the skill set. So it's the transferability of certificates. One, it's the geopolitics that's currently happening and nationalism that's growing. Two, and really is also the quality of work that these people might have done in their local market. Is a 5-year experienced mini grid developer in Nigeria the same as a 5-year experienced mini grid developer in Egypt? If one has done maybe 150 kilowatt peak system and the other has done a 1 megawatt system, are they the same thing? But then you can make those differences, right? So it's transferable certificates, taking consideration for nationalism that's seemed to be on the rise, and then just being able to quantify clearly the expertise that people have and making it transparent and visible for the country that they're going to.
Let's shine some light on your company. When I was going through your website, very clean, commendable, proud, to see that quality coming from Nigeria. I would like to understand more about your structure because I see that you train and you hire out. How does that work?
Our mission at ETC is we believe that we can transform economies by providing access to ETC vetted and trained talents for the global market as well as for the local market. Now, what that means is we look at the industry where we're currently operating, which is the renewable solar energy industry, and we ask ourselves, what does the industry need from a manpower perspective? Right? And on the flip side of that question is what is currently available, right? So if you go to a market and what is available is a lot of trained talent, but disintegrated, then you need to bring them together. But if you go to a market, large parts of Africa market, and what's available is a lot of poorly trained people, disintegrated, then the first part of what we do is training folks so that they meet a certain baseline standards, right? Whether it's baseline standard in the technical work itself or baseline standard in how you manage or communicate with, your team members or the end customers. That's the first part. So once we've done that part and we are doing that part, then the second part is making these people accessible to the markets, which is aggregating them and providing access to them, whether for full-time based work or for part-time project-based services. So that's what we do. So we are basically solving the access to talent challenge in the market. And in the markets where we currently play is a two-pronged approach. One is getting the talent or verifying their skill sets and getting them to a baseline standard, and then making them accessible to companies or the organizations that need them for full-time based employment or part-time project-based services.
I like that. It's quite innovative. Just to buttress on what you've said, here in Sweden and most of the Nordic nations, they are really big on vocational education, vocational universities. How it normally works is that they look at the industry. What are the skill gap? What are the required skills? Where is the industry going in the next 4 or 5 years? and
Mhm.
they tailor courses and programs
Mhm.
to be able to fill those gaps.
Mhm.
And that's what you're doing literally. And
Mhm.
it's quite commendable. It's the fastest way to deploy skilled talents and workforce into the
Yeah.
industry.
Yeah.
So I can resonate with that. I'm also a product of such training here in
Brilliant.
Sweden, both in
Brilliant.
engineering, concrete engineering, and also in the renewable energy space.
Brilliant.
It's amazing because it gives you an in-depth knowledge of the industry.
Yeah.
But looking at the job market, what skills or what profession is the hardest to fill? Is it the engineers, designers? Is it the O&M technicians or trade people?
Yeah, so it depends on the markets that you look at, right? So we currently are in three markets, Nigeria, Ghana, and Kenya. And they
Mm,
are, Africa is 54 countries. They're not all the same. They all have different things. But I'll focus on Nigeria. So right now, Nigeria is a peculiar market. Like markets like Kenya, for example, they started with Pico SHS systems in rural communities and then graduated and then moved on. And Nigeria is peculiar because places like Kenya, there's good grid, right?
mm,
It's provision of good grid. Places like South Africa, good grid up until maybe a couple of years ago when, their grid was having issues and
mm,
solar took
mm,
off, really. So in a market like Nigeria, it's been interesting, right? Because it started off firstly as a focus on off-grid mini-grids that were majorly grant funded. And then, especially in more recent times when the currency got devalued and the devaluation of the naira, and also quote unquote removal of subsidy, it meant that solar became extremely, extremely attractive to commercial and industrial players in the markets. There's now a stronger commercial case for using solar and cutting down maybe 20% of, or 25% or 30% of your grid cost or your energy cost as industry. So we're seeing a lot of very serious players coming in the commercial and industrial space. We have this chats internally where we show the evolution of solar and the sort of skills that's needed, where it moves from Pico to residential, small residential systems to, CNI, mini grid systems, and then interconnected mini grid. So we're not at full on interconnected mini grid. So that transition is where you're going to find a bit of challenge where, certain OEM specialist commissioning specialists, there's a big gap there. So you're seeing a lot of players having to rely on certain EPCs or certain other players who have built capacity there. So maybe one player might be going from one site to the next site
mm.
for interconnected mini grids as they are coming more and more into the market in recent times, right? Nigeria lost a good portion of our skilled design, senior engineering talent sometime in the height of the japa season 2020 to 2022. For those who do not know what japa is, it's just emigration out of Nigeria.
Immigration.
Yeah. So sometime around that, we saw quite a significant exodus. So right
Mm,
now you have a limited pool of people who have good professional expertise, know how to talk, know how to communicate clearly, have good design skills with a background from having come up through the ranks as a field technician or field expert. You have a limited pool of that currently in the market. The other piece is really, it's a nascent ish industry. So people who know how to close really large deals, business development folks, you see gaps there as well, right? Who can go in. So you have the guys who've been in the industry for 10 years, 5 years, and have not 5 years, 10 years plus, and have learned on the job. And they are now business owners and they are looking for, people who have this capacity. And the bigger players with deeper pockets are outbidding the much smaller players because, where there's scarcity, people would go for the person who can offer the most. So there's significant gap in the more senior level skills due to the immigration that happened, the transition that's happening in Nigeria from, distributed systems to interconnected mini grids. There's not as much expertise there yet, but it's growing. Yeah, things like that.
I will tell you this challenge is not peculiar to Africa, because for a country like Sweden, we have a very
Hello?
matured grid. Okay, let me repeat. I was saying that the skill gap in the more senior or experienced workforce is not just peculiar for Nigeria. Let me borrow that word peculiar from you. So it's also same here in Sweden. Although we have a very advanced grid system, but solar energy and renewables are also relatively new here. We experienced the highest boom at around 2022, 2023. So we don't necessarily have a well-developed O&M industry. So it's like we're learning, we are adapting, we don't have the framework figured out. And there's also this misconception that solar doesn't need maintenance, but you have to watch different pieces, especially when big storage BSS is involved.
Yeah.
And over here, we are even at the level of energy trading. So you have AI where you have to optimize your different energy system, know when to sell and when to buy. So it's not peculiar. But if you're 22 years old now and want to venture into renewable energy in Nigeria, or let's keep it to Nigeria, Ghana, Kenya, what skill would you go for first?
It depends on what your background is. If you are, sadly, we do a lot of academic stuff. So let's say you have an engineering background,
Yeah.
but you still want to come in, you're handy and you want to come into the renewable energy space. The core thing is just ensure your foundation is good. Your basic physics, basic electricity is what it should be, because everything builds on physics and electricity. So everything builds on that for technical roles. The way we like to think of how we structure this is having sufficient field exposure allows you to be a better designer, a more empathetic designer, because now you're not designing and sitting in a room and not knowing what the experience of having to interpret a design on the field is like or feels like. So we like for junior guys to go, get their hands dirty initially. And then once you've gotten your hands dirty, you can now start to decide on a path. You might find out that you're not very comfortable with heights, right? So your legs shake when you are above a certain meter. So maybe you want to be staying indoors and talking to customers and explaining to them what their system does, or doing design. You might find out that you actually like the experience of figuring out what the most optimal design for a system is that helps the customer to save money. You might find that that's something you're more prone to, because, software or being a software developer is sexy, or used to be. Sadly, for junior software developers, there's a lot of AI coming out that's making junior software developer roles to more or less be looking extinct. Right? There was a big drive that was done 10 years ago, into 7 years ago, 5 years ago, that got a lot of people interested in software. So if you're a young 22-year-old and you're still thinking of software as a junior engineer, you should probably rethink that, because AI is disrupting everything there. But if you have that sort of propensity, you can come in and take on a design role within solar, build the capacity, the field, and it still allows you to express that part of you, but in a more maybe physical assets type thing. So that's for the technical side. If you're non-STEM, you like to talk to customers, there are multiple things. Even for the technical side, there's data analysts. As more systems come, into the fore in Africa, you need to now start managing the data. I'm skeptical about that one, because with the AI system as well, AI is probably going to be a better data analyst than a junior engineer. So, right. But for non-technical, even if you have a STEM background, actually, I find that if you have a STEM background and are willing to learn or have a propensity for engaging with people, you can be a better salesperson, because now you understand how the system works. and you can better communicate it. Whether you have STEM background or you do not have STEM background, roles like sales, very, very lucrative right now. Not a lot of salespeople in this space. So building basic knowledge of how solar works, the technology that enables them to work, building certain skills in interpersonal communication and interpersonal relating, customer support, customer service, you can at some point, again, it's really hard to say what AI would take and not take, but customer support might be one of those things. But building those interpersonal skills that allows you to go out, very lucrative right now. Sales, health and safety officers, if you want to stay somewhere in between technical and non-technical, there's opportunity as a health and safety officer to come in and do a really fantastic work. And the interesting thing about this, other than the barriers we talked about earlier, a lot of these skills are transferable. The work that you do in Nigeria, with certain things, eventually with the work we are doing at ETC, you'll be able to transfer those skills to Sweden, like Mr. Prosper, where Mr. Prosper is working, and to the US and other places, but those are some of the things that I can think of right now.
I really resonate with what you say, that you like to send your junior trainees out in the field to have some experience. And from there, they can go ahead and become whoever they want to be, salesperson, designer. And that was actually the approach I took when I first ventured into renewable energy. I started off as I went for a crash course in installation, and after that, I went and I installed panels on rooftops. It was interesting. It gave me the basic knowledge. I can easily design a system without having so much trouble, because I understand how it's going to be in real life. With sales also, when you're talking to someone about something that you have actually done with your hands, you bring in a different level of clarity to that conversation. Yeah. What do you see in the next 5 to 10 years for your company?
It's pretty straightforward. We think, we know that hands-on skills is going to be even more and more important in the world, right? That the piping of the world would require more hands-on, vocational skills than it historically has. For us, one is we want to enable some of the problems we identified during this conversation, right? Transferability of skills, finding a way to make it possible for, firstly, within Africa and then outside of the continent. It's easy right now in the hubs, West Africa and East Africa. So I can move as a Kenyan to Uganda and do work. But when it gets more difficult is when I'm moving from Nigeria to South Africa, my skill still recognized the same way. And how easy is it to make that transition in that way? And then more importantly, being able to transfer those skills to places you feel like would have more demand or would pay more for your ability or for your skill. Because if you're selling your skill as your primary product, which is really selling your time and your knowledge, right? Then I'm sure as any business person would, you want to get the highest profits from it. So we want to enable that happen. So we're right now building the rails to make that happen. But beyond that, the work that we're doing in the renewable or in the solar space, we want to enable it across multiple other vocational technical spaces. We think there's an opportunity to build competency, baseline, high standard competency across multiple technical vocational skills. And that those things will set us apart, whether it's the medical technician or the farm mechanic, across those places, things that would have impact on the continents where we came into this world, right, and beyond.
That future looks bright, because just like you mentioned earlier, that we are going to be the youngest workforce in the world. So having a company or institution like yours training people and finding a way to unify the certifications, I guess you will need a lot of collaborations with the international bodies and certification institutions to be able to achieve that.
Yeah, we believe in partnerships. We consider the work that we're doing to be an infrastructure work and not so much a training company work. Yeah, so it's building the infrastructure to make that happen. And that infrastructure is mostly built along the rails of partnerships.
Exactly. I was having a conversation with one of the founders of an education institute here in Sweden, and he told me they had a collaboration with Uganda before. And what they found out was that people in Uganda have more competence in storage systems than people over here.
Yeah.
And it became an exchange where people here were talking about more system design, the safety measures, uh, and while people in Uganda they were far ahead of
Yeah.
battery
Yeah.
storage system. And I think because here
Yeah.
they have a reliable grid, so it was just more like a summer thing, a backup
Yeah.
system. It's just recently that all the installations are now being done with a battery, and then they do retrofit for
Yeah.
older installations to add the BSS on it. And while in Nigeria and Africa, it's like we started with complete because the
Yeah.
renewable is our main source of energy. So it has to have the battery system.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And one thing that I noticed that is different here, installation of solar is divided into two. First group is the DC side. You can have
Mhm.
your proficiency installation of DC side from solar
Mhm.
panel down to the
Yeah.
inverter. Your job
Yeah.
stops here. And
Yeah.
then it's why the electrician takes over. But
Yeah.
it seems that in Nigeria, one man can do all. How does it work?
Yeah, so that's the evolution that we're talking about. So I told you, when things start from Pico SHS
Yeah,
all the way up, the
yeah,
higher you go. So large parts of Europe is interconnected grids, right?
mhm,
There's
yeah,
no way you cannot be specialized. If not, you're going to cause a lot of problems, right?
yeah,
So the higher you go in the complexity of work to be done, the more specialized you need to be.
yeah,
So we're seeing more of that specialization happening now in country as the systems are getting more complex, right? Where you're now getting a commissioning specialist, but that commissioning specialist would have in time past, done every other thing. And it's happened across others, sectors. But the reality is in 10 years time, you would not find most of those things you're talking about. It would probably be maybe an electrician that can do a plug and play solar system for a small house, and every other person will probably be specialist, design specialist, that those minimal things. And outside of that, as they call it, the power side specialist, that what needs to be done there. There's the mounting and stringing, right? Because
mhm,
there's guys who are just roofers. That's all they know how to do.
yes,
They mount the thing and then they go. I didn't know how to navigate that at height. So as you get, more complex system, you're going to see that happen, because the reality is, if you specialize an industry too early, it's like, do you have sufficient work for the specialist if that's all
mm,
they are focused on, right? As against if they were more generalist or more nuanced specialist.
I get it. I get it. We are getting there. That's eventually where we will be in the nearest future. And
Yeah.
it's been great chatting with you. Who would you want to see on our show next?
Can I say Elon Musk?
Yeah, you can
Okay.
say that, but we will see how realistic that will be.
I think it's going to be interesting for you to find a finance person to speak with, and then maybe a regulator. The current head of NBET, they are the Nigeria Board of Technical Education. I forget the full acronym. He's a very passionate technical and vocational practitioner. He'll be great to have on the call. Also, there's an organization that is enabling the development of solar by sort of providing, guaranteed funding. They are called infra credits.
Credit.
I'm trying to remember the name. So either the CEO or someone who has good visibility as to the work that they're doing internally would also be good. So infra credit as an organization, finding a representative there that has full visibility of what's happening there. And then the DG, I believe is his role, of NBTE, and I believe
Mhm.
that's it, but Nigerian Board of Technical and Vocational education. I believe is what
Okay.
that background was. So very passionate man, and be a good person to speak with.
Well, thank you for the list. I will search them, or maybe if you be willing or kind enough to share their details later. And for people that want to follow your work or want to get trained or maybe looking for workforce, where will they find you?
So it's energytalentco.com, www.energytalentco.com. From there, you can find a lot of other things, but also you can, look for us on LinkedIn at Energy Talent Company. If you search Energy Talent Company on LinkedIn, you will find us, and we'll be happy to connect with you and answer any questions you have.
Definitely. When we publish this podcast, we will link your contact information on it. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I believe that our listeners must have enjoyed this show. You have shared a lot of values. We appreciate you. Thank you so much, Ugochukwu.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It was a pleasure. Pleasure to meet you. I actually have one question. You said people were
Yes.
moving towards storage in Sweden. I'm curious
Yeah.
why, because I know you have bidirectional grid. Why are they not using that anymore?
Of course, one of the reasons first is the cap on how much energy you can sell back to the grid, because solar is when the sun is shining. So you produce a lot. And during that time also, the price is low because we have this arbitrage volatility in the energy price here in Sweden. So the price goes up and down, and during the day is when you produce most energy. And if you're sending it to the grid, you're not making money. And sometimes we have even negative price. So you have to pay. It will cost you to send to the grid.
Interesting.
That's one reason, the economic aspect of it. Then Europe is going towards energy resilience in case of any crisis. So they call it crisis readiness. In case something happens with the national grid with batteries, we can continue having uninterrupted electricity. So that's also one of the things. And we have big incentive for that. You can get up to 50% of the cost from tax reduction of the storage cost. So it's one of the most hyped thing now happening in Sweden and the Nordics. And then there's frequency regulation, where all these small batteries are interconnected through cloud system. And the aggregators now offer services to the national grid.
Yeah.
So at all points, we have to produce exactly the amount of energy required.
Yeah.
If we are producing more, then these aggregators, through their AI optimized system, will start using more energy from the grid by charging the batteries. And if the grid needs more energy, then they will offload the stored energies to the grid.
Yeah.
So these are the things we are missing in Nigeria. We are missing a whole lot of market, the trading, the peak shaving. So now everybody is talking about storage. We're even doing hydrogen storage, looking at other ways to store electricity. So that's the reason. I hope I answered your question.
Yes. Thank you. I was curious about that. Thank you. And that's very clear. Brilliant. Thank you for the show. Yeah.
You're welcome. We will stay in touch, and you listeners out there, thank you for tuning in. Until next time, stay strong, keep shining, peace and solar power to the people. Thank you.
This is Solardey, where every story begins with the sun.